Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest? Can I interview you? Or you? Or you? Or you? Or maybe you guys? How about you?
Welcome, everybody. This is a humorous history podcast, and we are, in fact, the Goofy Historians. Today, we're going to start talking about the Romans, the Roman Empire in the 3rd century specifically. I did a complete introduction for this video, and it's available on Patreon. So be sure and check that out, because right now we're going to just jump right in. The two emperors that we're going to talk about today came after the crisis of the 3rd century. And this was a time when basically Rome was finished. It was done. And these Diocletian and Constantine the Great came along, gave it some CPR, and it lasted another couple hundred years almost. So Diocletian, we're going to start with him. He was born in 243 and died in 311 at the age of 65. That's an interesting thing because also Constantine the Great died at the age of 65 in the year 272. So let's get started with Diocletian. And Joseph, where's a good place to get started with?
Yeah, so let me just can I take a little broader perspective?
Sure.
After Julius Caesar, right, BC, established like the empire or overthrew the republic, from Emperor Augustus all the way through Severus, 265 years, there was only 24 emperors. Like they were living good long reigns, and it's called the Pax Romana. So, and the reason, and it was a very boring time, but if you're living in history, you want to live in the most boring time imaginable, right? Marcus Aurelius was a great emperor, but he made a critical decision, critically poor decision when he put his son in line to be an emperor. Commodus, who's famous for in the Gladiator movies. After that, yeah, remember Commodus, Gladiator, yeah. With
available
so
on
after him, things fell apart. They go into something called the crisis of the 3rd century, and it's only 50 years, but during those 50 years there was like 70 different emperors. I mean, the shortest reign was like 20 days. The Rome itself had actually split apart into 3 different sections. One, the Gallic Empire, separated off. This is, we're done with you guys. That was modern day France, Spain, and England. It's a huge section to lose if you're an empire, right? And another section, the Palmyran Empire with Zenobia, the queen, took over. And that was basically all of the Levant, Syria, Israel today, will be Israel. I guess it was Israel back then too, and Egypt. So basically all that was left of Rome was Rome. Like there was Italy and maybe a little bit of North Africa. That was it, right? And there was runaway inflation, there was plagues, there was wars, the barbarians were coming over the border en masse. Things didn't look good. So there's one emperor before Diocletian called Aurelius. He actually, but he didn't come till he was late in life. He was like 56, which is pretty old back then. But he was a general, and he stopped the bleeding. He got back Spain and France and England. He got back the Eastern Empire. He reunited the whole Roman Empire, but he didn't last long after that because he was already old when that started. Eventually, Diocletian.
I think that when he died, that was the guy where the legions, they were so in love with that emperor that when he was no longer the emperor, they were so despondent they couldn't do their job, and they were like depressed for months.
Right, because I mean,
Wow, right.
he actually lasted like a few years, like 5 or 6 years instead of 20 days, like some of these emperors did. So he sort of restabilized things, got things together, restabilized. And what was interesting, I thought, so the queen of the East, the Pomeranian Emperor Zenobia, he actually got her, he brought her back to Rome, and she had to go in the procession with golden handcuffs, sort of sexy, right? But then he set her up in a little book club right outside of Rome, where she lived the rest of her life in peace, having having little book clubs, philosophy clubs, and everybody sort of elite little social club. The
Well,
other one, I
that's
think,
refreshing, because what we're going to talk about is these emperors before Diocletian and Constantine. The average lifespan of an emperor, if you were an emperor for 18 months, that was a long
that was, yeah,
a long
during the
time, because
crisis period.
he
Yeah.
got assassinated.
So the fact that he's not killing her is a great sign that things are getting better. And even the emperor of the Gallic Empire up north, I think it was Emperor Tetras or something, brought him back to Rome too, and he set him up at a clerk in like a fast food joint, right? So he didn't kill him either. He set him up in a middle management job. And so him and Zeno were probably going to literary clubs together. So he wasn't killing people. He was setting stuff up, even though he was a very good general. But after him was Diocletian. And
Yeah, but
Diocletian
you know what? They probably wanted to kill themselves, because if you think about it, they were an emperor, and now it's like you're a manager at Foot Locker. So
I don't know. Maybe that was a step up after, knowing the life expectancy of an emperor, right? Becoming the manager of a Foot Locker is probably pretty good. He should have become the falconer for Diocletian. Would have been a good job.
All right, so
we have to get on to Diocletian. So it was still in a crisis. What Diocletian did was first of all, he stabilized the economy. During this bad times, there was runaway inflation because people were just diluting the currency. They were taking gold and mixing it with lead, right, in order just to generate more money. So inflation was out of control. And since it was a crisis, everybody was getting into these little cults, little religious things from the East, nobody was staying put. There was a lot of movement in the empire as people went out looking for jobs, and a lot of migrations. So first of all, he got off all the cheap coins, reissued new coins in real gold and real silver, right, and put little edges on it so you can't take off little bits of the silver and try to get more for your money. Everything sort of reboot the system, right? And he says, like, if your father's a carpenter, you're a carpenter. If your father's a soldier, you're a soldier, right? The whole thing is just to stop. Everybody stop, right? And he put like he fixed prices to say, if an apple is worth 20 sesterces today, it's worth 20 sesterces tomorrow, right? Everything just to keep the empire from breaking apart again. He needed to stabilize. He wanted to make Rome great again. He was the Murga person of that time, right? And one of the things he says, look, and when we were great during Caesar's time, during Augustus' time, during Marcus Aurelius's time, we all worshiped the same God, right? So we're all going back to worshiping Zeus, right? And that's when
Zeus.
Zeus.
He's finally coming back. And you know what? Something you mentioned just a little bit earlier about they were adding lead to the coins. They also were using lead pipes, and they were getting lead poisoning by then too. And now, so they got lead poisoning, and they're going back to Zeus. Yes, gotta love Dio. Go ahead.
Gotta be good. So that's what Diocletian was doing. But what he's super famous for is saying, so after he reunited the empire, he goes, the reason it fell apart, one of the reasons it fell apart is just too friggin' big, right? So he says, I'm going to have like a co-emperor, right? In this case, he got a man called Maximian. So there's Diocletian in the east, there's Maximian in the west, right? So they can both take care of their own barbarians right, and take care of their own, stabilize their own section of their empire. But they're all both emperors, and it's still one Rome, with two emperors. And then they got, and they called them the Augustans. They were the head ones. And under them, they had like these emperors in training called the Caesars. And in the east with Diocletian, they had Constantius, and in Maximian in the west, they had Galerius, I guess, was one of them, or maybe I got those two mixed up, but that's how, and what he wanted to do is establish something so the inheritance issue will be taken care of. What was the problem with the old Roman emperor? Every time a Roman emperor died, nobody knew who the next Roman emperor was. So, the armies kept promoting their own generals to become emperors, right? So they said, so the emperor in training would always become the new emperors, right? And then they would get a new emperor in training. So it was supposed to be perpetual like that. And it didn't last. It only lasted Diocletian's time. So after Diocletian, so Diocletian was the only emperor who actually retired. Okay? He retired and went to Croatia to grow cabbages.
Croatia to grow cabbages. Okay, that's great. So next time you're in Croatia, stop by Dio's house and look at the cabbage patch. And if you were confused a little bit on that description of what just happened, you can follow along on the show notes. We're going to have a diagram of the situation there before we get to Constantine.
Yeah. Right. So what happened? So one of the co-emperors or the emperors in training, his name calls Constantius, and I think he's actually, I think I best because he's the Western guy. So he moves up to the main emperor of the West. So he's the Western emperor.
That's Constantine's daddy.
It's Constantine's father. But one of the rules was that he didn't want this patrimony stuff going on. If you were related to an emperor, you couldn't become emperor yourself. They wanted you to go out and find, not just because you're the son of an emperor, you got to go through like a job interview, and go through a training section. So you couldn't be related to the emperor directly. So Constantine was out, right? He was related to Constantius, right?
So what you're telling me is that Constantine the Great never should have even been an emperor at all. And now we're going to spend the rest of the video talking about how he legalized Christianity and changed the whole world. It wasn't even his job.
It wasn't even his job. He shouldn't have even had that job if he was a good Christian. So Constantine's father takes over as head emperor of the West, but then he dies, right? And Constantine's working with him as his like general, because they're retaking, because one of the things, some other guy came along and tried to be emperor of England, and there was going to be 3 emperors and not 2. And they says, no, there's only 2 emperors, and they had to go fight that guy. So while they're fighting that guy, Constantius dies, all right, and the other fake emperor dies, and Constantine says, well, I'm emperor. And his Constantine's father was Valerius, and he says, well, no, I move up, not you, Constantine. For one thing, you're a son, you can't even be emperor, right? So they have another war between him and Valerian, and finally they come to terms, and Valerian says, okay, I'm going to become Augustine, and you can become the Caesar, right? Which shouldn't happen because he's related to the previous emperor, right? But it's better than a civil war. So now Constantine's in line to become the emperor of the West, right? But Maximian in the West, he has a son called Maxentius, right? And he's saying, wait, whoa, dudes, you can't make Constantine friggin' heir to the throne. What about me? Right? If he can be heir to the throne, I can be heir to the throne. But unfortunately, his father is still on the throne. So anyways, he goes, forget it. Forget all of this stuff. I'm just taking Rome. you guys figure out what you're doing. I'm now emperor of everything, right? So he comes, he takes all of Italy and North Africa, and now he's the emperor sitting in Rome, and he is not part of the tetrarchy at all. He's just sitting there in Rome, right? So finally, Valerius dies, maybe with the help of Constantine. So Constantine raises up, but Constantine never gets anybody to be his Caesar. He's just the sole emperor. He never bothers with this tetrarchy anymore. He's alone in the West, right? So there's him in the West. There's Constantius in Italy, and you still have the two emperors, you know, in the East, right? And they try to get the old emperors back. There's two emperors that are still retired, right? And since things have gone sideways, they want to get these two old emperors back on the throne so they can restabilize things because the people respect them. But Diocletian says, forget it. I'm raising mushroom, or what is it, cabbages, right? I'm not going to get into that again. But Maximian, his co-Augustin, comes back. So now they have like 5 emperors. It's a mess. Again, so you're getting back to the crisis of the 3rd century.
Okay, so let me bring it up to speed here. So it
gets too confusing.
There's a battle, and it's called Milvian Bridge. And after that battle, Constantine is the only emperor. Well, let's jump right to that, because
well, he's not the only.
Otherwise, we're not going to talk about Constantine at all.
There's still 3 emperors in the East, right? But he does take Italy. He fights Maxentius in Rome, who's just this guy out of the blue. He took over the Rome. So that's the Battle of Milvian Bridge. And that's when Jesus comes to Constantine and says, you believe in me and you're going to win the battle, right? So that's the point where
this is where we should start the video, right here. We should start the damn video at Milvian Bridge. I don't know why we're talking about Dio. Okay, so let's get to the fun stuff. So no, hold on a second here. This is the only thing that's important, is Constantine was seeing visions, and I'm seeing visions right now. That I have a vision that we can resuscitate this video and finish it. But anyway, so it's one of these things like the damn Chinese Jesus. He's like, well, I had this dream and then we won the battle. I call bullshit. He won the battle and then he backed up and said he had a dream about a cross. And so now he's gonna take Christianity and make it illicit religion. Prior to that, it was an illicit religion. So I kind of want to jump to that, because that changed everything all the way until today. If Constantine hadn't saw a vision or said he saw a vision, you know, Christianity might not exist today. That's how important that is. So what I want to ask, my question is, you know, did he see a vision?
Well, I think well, he had a dream, and then some of his he had, well, and again, it's like the Chinese Jesus. The further you get on in history, the more complicated the vision and the scene began, right? The earliest versions is he had a dream, and he had a counselor that was Christian. He says, "Oh, that's Jesus talking to you, though it was just a dream." And then they woke up in the morning in the battle, and there was like the sun, and there was like a halo around the sun with, you know, the light shining. And he says, "Oh, that's the cross of Jesus, and therefore we're going to win." But the further you get away from the event to some of the other authors after they became Christians, it became more and more elaborate, right? Where there's like words written across the Christ saying, originally they're written in Greek saying, under this sign you will conquer, and it's a Cairo, and then it was the same thing, but it was said in Latin. So what I think is that Latin was sort of the subtitle. God speaks Greek, but there was a little subtitle in Latin so the soldiers could read it. and the sun shining from the sky became like the Cairo, and they put it on their shields. But I think the main point is people say that that was how that was like the victory of Christianity. To me, that was the defeat of, that's where Christianity died, right? Because the only thing happened in that event was that Constantine stopped calling Zeus Zeus and called him Christ, right? There was no difference. It was the same God, right? It was still God. Christ became a war god. I mean, the only reason you would follow a god is if he's giving you victories, right? If Constantine had lost that battle, he would have gone back to Zeus, right?
I love
it's not
that.
like
That's so great. That's so great because my position is all of a sudden I'm a Christian, and I'm thinking that, you know, Constantine really did have a vision, and maybe it was Zeus, maybe it was God, but whatever it was, maybe, you know, historians say that, you know, he just had the foresight to be able to use Christianity as a unifying religion. No, he's just like anybody else that stumbles on God.
Yeah, I mean, well, and 2 years before that, he had a vision of Zeus telling him he was gonna win a battle, right? So this isn't something new to him. He's having visions all the time about winning the battle. But
look,
the point,
you call him Zeus, I call him Jesus. I call him Yah. It's all the same.
There was no. It's not like he's sitting around reading the Beatitudes and says, "Oh, let's like turn the other cheek and love our enemies," right? He didn't read the teachings of Jesus, right? About, you know, you give me your cloak, I'll give you. No, none of that bullshit. And it could have been that God in heaven says, you know, this peace and love shit isn't working, right? Let's get militant. So with Constantine, Christianity becomes militant and it becomes doctrinal, right? And everything Jesus taught is now done, right? And it's true that everybody becomes Christian because they have to, right? If you're going to move up.
That's not true. He didn't have the power to say to everybody, now you have to be a Christian. He never did that. What he did, he started to promote Christianity. And well, first he made it legal, then he started promoting it. You know, then it was one of the state religions. You know what? The thing is, it's like, there's a long, going back in history, this long saying about basically Hitler used it when he was talking about fascism. He says, the only way to beat fascism is to become fascist. So I'll win anyway. Not that I want to quote Hitler here, but it's the same thing. So for Christianity to get started and to take hold, he had to be a war of God, or there wouldn't have been. So kind of fascist won either way there too. Yes.
So yeah, I mean, Christianity had gotten to be like 10% of the empire, but it was mainly foreigners, slaves, women, grave diggers. But after Constantine promoted the religion, obviously, if you want to rise politically, you go with the religion that the Constantine is currently espousing, and not the one that Jesus taught or even the one that Paul taught. It's the one where you win victories, right? Before, the early Christians, they says, well, if I'm a Christian, can I actually join the legions? Can I become join the army, the Roman army? And so it was a big thing, like, you can't be a Christian and join the army. But now it's like it's God who's at the head of the armies, right? And after he took the victory of the Milvian Bridge, he took the emperor he defeated, Maxentius. He put his head on a pole, right, and paraded it around Rome, and it could have been a cross. So that's what Christianity had become with Constantine. It doesn't forgive your enemies. It doesn't love you. It doesn't turn the other cheeks. It's putting their head on a pole and parading it around Rome.
And I know, but we're going around in circles here. We know, we understand that, because in order to beat fascism, you have to become a fascist. And you know what? He did that with a pole because that's what was written in the vision, right? It said,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. He saw
it
this
was
like this
subtitles.
Ryko on a pole, and now he's putting a head on it.
It was subtitles. It was supposed to be build Rome back brick by brick, and the subtitles got messed up, and it said put Maximus's head on a stick.
He couldn't read the Latin because he was Greek. Yeah, so, and also after that, after his conversion to Christianity, he ended up killing his wife and boiling his son alive. So
well, you got to do that kind of stuff. But the thing is, what he did do after that, he was like, you know what? Christianity is great. It's going to work. It's a unifying force. Problem is, Rome is all full of these pagan symbols. I need a new city. I need a new city. And he went and he found one. What was it called? Go ahead. Take it from here.
He didn't found it. There was Byzantium. There was Byzantium. It was a big city before him, but he just went. And the other thing about during this time, none of the emperors were living in Rome. Right? Rome was a backwater by that point, right? Because the emperor had expanded so much, you couldn't sit in Rome and control anything. So they had capitals in Cologne and Trier and Byzantium and other cities all around the empire where they could actually control things, right? But Constantine, humility was not one of the things that Constantine got from his Christianity, right? So he took over, so he actually moved to Byzantium and renamed it Constantinople, the city.
Which was such a great move. You got to admit, that was the prime, that was the best move any emperor ever made, even count all Julius Caesar's victories. When Constantine created Constantinople and created the walls, it became an impenetrable city, and it lasted until Mehmed II in 1453. So that would have been like 1,300 years. So compare it, and didn't get sacked and withstood dozens of sieges, and was fine and stayed in Christian hands all the way until then. Meanwhile, back in Rome got sacked during that time period. I don't know, 24 times.
Yeah, well, probably, yeah. Two major ones when it were the end of the Roman Empire in the West. But okay, we got to hurry up. We're running out of time, probably. The other big thing that happened this time was that Constantine, first he is in the Edict of Naples. He says, okay, all religions are free. You can worship anything you want. You think this is like a liberal, progressive emperor, right? But what happened, all these Christians that were persecuted or, an illicit religion for so long, like they was like staying below the radar, right? Once it was legal, they all came out of the woodwork and they all started fighting among themselves, right? There were Donatists, there were Arians, there were Nestorians, there were Coptics, there were Marcions, there were Gnostics. And it's not like they got along. They started fighting with each other, right? Especially the Donatists. The Donatists were a group of Christians who survived the persecutions, right? They never lit incense to the god, right? So then once Constantine comes up, there's all these Christians who are like perfectly fine being heathens, right? And now Constantine, and they come out as Christians. And the Donatist says, well, no, you can't do that. That's bullshit, right? Only we are Christians because we were Christians before Constantine. And so there was a war, and so Constantine actually comes and sits down with the Donatists and the non-Donatists, right? And he says, well, no, Donatists, you're wrong, right? Because first of all, I was a heathen, right? And I'm still a heathen because I still support the pagan religions. On his little coins, he puts his little face, and on the opposite side of his coin is Zeus. So he's still doing the graven image things, even after he becomes a Christian. So he says, Donatists, no, you just got to cool it, right? But of course they don't, even though Constantine said they have to, they didn't. And then the Donatists pick up, the true Christians, according to them, pick up arms and start killing the new Christians, and the new Christians start killing the old Christians. So Christianity isn't legal a year before Christians start killing each other, right? And then finally, Constantine has to get an army and come down and destroy all of the Donatists. So they're the first Christian genocide. And again, it's not pagans killing the Christians, it's Christians killing the Christians. So that's when finally Constantine says, okay, all you Christians shut up, right? We're trying to have unity here. We're trying to have peace. So he says, everybody get together in one room in Nicaea, right? And I'll sit at the head of the table, and all of you Christians get together in this room, and you're not leaving until you decide what you believe, right? Because we can't have 50 different forms of Christianity. And that's where the Nicene Creed comes from. Okay. So, and after the Nicene Creed, they come up with this. So this is the true form of Christianity, basic Catholicism. And then they try to burn all the other books of the other Christianity, the Gnostics and the Nestorians run away to China and to Genghis Khan. The Coptics sort of hide out in Egypt, and the Arians go up to north because they had just converted all of the Gothic tribes to Arianism. So not only, as soon as the barbarian tribes get converted to Christianity, they get excommunicated. It's like, what bullshit, right? So when actually Rome fell in 407 and in 473, they said it was the barbarians, came in and sacked Rome. Those barbarians were Christians, right? They were just excommunicated Christians, and that's why they were probably pissed off. So that's
I think that's great. It lasted all the way till 400, basically. So that's amazing.
473 before it was gone, right?
Because we started this in the 200s when it was done. So it lasted a couple hundred years after it should have been done anyway. And I was kind of joking when I chimed in about the lead, but that is a theory that because they did use lead pipes for their water, a lot of them maybe did get lead poisoning and got a little bit wacky towards the end. But
yeah. Well, yeah, the life expectancy of Romans wasn't long enough for them to be worried about lead poisoning. But
okay.
but some of the ones who lived past 50, yeah, but most of them were. They weren't going to die of lead poisoning. They were dead long before that, because they didn't have vaccines
the Romans are cool.
Cure a lot of childhood diseases.
Yeah. The Romans are cool, but really, it becomes such a bureaucracy and administrative. When you start talking about it, it's pretty darn dry. When you go back to Julius Caesar, and Julius Caesar is writing his own material and sending it off to Rome on a daily basis and building up his enemies, that's cool. That's interesting stuff. Later on, it gets kind of like just too administrative and just too many emperors and stuff like that. Where was I going with that? Anyway, yeah. So the Romans, they gave us so much, though. In the intro video I did for Patreon, I mentioned it all. From roads to concrete to, I guess, Roman numerals kind of got replaced by Arabic numerals because they're a little bit easier to use, right?
Yeah, Arabic, yeah, and the creation of zero. Yeah, it wasn't easy counting in Rome, and no, they were good engineers. They weren't good philosophers, as you can tell by Marcus Aurelius. They weren't even good at art. They were good at building roads and bridges. They had that down, and they were good at their legions, right? But
they were good at building water systems.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, aqueducts and stuff like that, right? But
is it true that some of those aqueducts are still working today?
Oh yeah. In Paris, they have aqueducts that were built during the Roman times, so they were very good engineers, but they weren't good mathematicians, right? So one of the things that was interesting, like you have pipes, right? So you got taxed on how you get water to your house, right? By these pipes that they're getting from the aqueducts, right? So they taxed you, right? Not on the circumference of the pipe, but on the diameter of the pipe, right? And so it's like, unless you know math, right? Like the amount of water is not proportional to the diameter. It's proportional to like the it's not proportional to the radius is proportional to the diameter. So
Well,
they
anyway,
could
at
have got
least
a lot more money if they knew a little bit about geometry.
they did pretty good. If the aqueducts are still standing today, that must have been hella concrete that they mixed.
Yeah, they did. They did good at that. They did good at that. Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. This was it, one and done on the Romans. We might get back to Julius Caesar later in the year. I think next we're going to do maybe Alexander the Great. Ali from Gates of Babylon wasn't able to join us. He got mixed up on the time frame, AM and PM. It was the whole flat Earth thing. He was having trouble with that. But we'll get him back again for another show. And go ahead and hit subscribe if you haven't, and we'll talk to you real soon. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest? Does history repeat itself? Not really. But sometimes it kind of rhymes.